Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. We are here in December. It is the holiday season, so we are bringing you some holiday joy with some forgotten Christmas specials. This week, of course, I am your host, Nate Wyckoff, comedian and film critic, and with us as often, Tad Mastriani. How are you doing, Tad?
Ho ho hos.
Where there's actually ho-ho in one of these films. And with us again is Greg Johnson. How are you doing, Greg?
Nate, I can tell you every time I don't want to talk to you.
It's online. I don't think that the restraining order applies. Mandy Longley. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm good, but I was looking for the Scourges Anonymous meeting. Is this not it?
It is not. It is not. I think you're going to run into a whole new set of problems. Oh, so I'm really excited for this because for December 2020, the end of our first official year as a fully functioning podcast, I wanted the entire month to be various weird, forgotten, or beloved, but kind of twisted holiday films. And I think that this first episode of the month really fits the bill. We have 1985's The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, which is based mostly on a short story by Frank L. Baum called The Same Thing. And of course, he is the author of Wizard of Oz and the many Wizard of Oz related books. And then we have 1977's A Cosmic Christmas, which is a 22 to 26 minute, depending on your version, short by Nelvana Animation, the Canadian animation group. And I just can't wait to talk about both these films. So we're going to jump right in. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. Now, especially if you look at the cover for like the VHS copy of this, and I believe there actually has been, I don't know if it's still in circulation, a DVD copy. It's sort of, you've got like a young boy talking to a little elf. It is stop motion animation, which is of course very well known in the Christmas holiday specials, what with the Frosty the Snowman and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and such. This one, there are several reasons why I think this one is not as well known, despite being a pretty big production for a stop motion animated film. It's about 50 minutes, and the plot, you're gonna have to take a seat for this one if you know Santa Claus's story, because it pretty much, Frank L. Baum tosses the whole thing out the window. There are a group of immortal creatures who live in a veritable Garden of Eden that is basically Africa without the black people. There's like elephants and lions and lots of white creatures. I don't know if I can really find a reason for the whitewashing of the cradle of life here, but that's what we're looking at. And these immortals are the Great Ak, which is a forestry god of some kind. He has this big, cool tree headpiece. And then we have a bunch of elves of various names. I don't remember the names. There are a lot of creatures. There's the demon of the wind spirits or something, who he looks kind of like a fall leaf, and he has like wind passing out from underneath his robe at all times, which leads to the inevitable gas jokes. And it's sort of like Santa Claus a la Lord of the Rings. But it mixes a bunch of other stuff in there. It's like Jungle Booky, because Santa Claus is found as a human baby, and then Ak gives him to a mountain lion who lives inside of a tree to raise. But then one of the like wood nymph creatures wants to know what it's like to raise a child because they don't have children, and so she steals the baby, and then they co-parent with the mountain lion, and then Claus, as they name him, grows up, and Ak says, now I'm going to show you how terrible people are, and then I'm going to make you live in the mortal world because you're a person. And I'm like,
can we rewind a little bit and just
Yes.
The wood spirit, I believe, asked the like king of the forest or whatever, what is a baby? And then he proceeds to, if I'm not mistaken, mansplain their entire existence to her.
He does.
Mm-hmm,
So here's the
yes.
thing. They have a round table, right? And around a tree stump kind of thing. And the Great Ak who is voiced by Alfred Drake, who is a big theater star in the 50s. All the big shows. I mean, Macbeth and Marco Polo production, big things. Did a little bit of TV before his death. He has a great voice. He does this guy's voice. And the great act is about 30 feet tall, if I can go by everyone else's height. And he is the ultimate old white guy. He does all the explaining. He makes all the decisions that no one second guesses for any reason whatsoever. And he's sort of the benevolent God, although this whole thing just takes any theology known to man and throws it in a wood chipper. But yeah, he's like, they're like, what's a baby? And they're like, the mortals like raised from a little one and then they grow up to be an adult and then they die and their existence is futile. And here's this thing that's hilarious, which is he says, we have always been as we are. And it like goes around the table and you're like, wait, you've always been an old person? Like you've always been like a toothless hag? You've always been like a weird jailbait elf? Like it is the most insane, like how can you be as you are yet clearly be aged? It made no sense. No sense. So, okay, there's a lot more to this story. So Santa is not yet Santa. His name is Claus because what does that mean? Does anybody remember? They said in the forest realm, it means something
little
like
one, I believe.
It's something like that. It's some.
Yeah.
It reminded me of like when you go to the fair and you'd be able to get like the little plaqued picture of your name with each letter, saying like, you know, N is for, I don't know, new or something. It was not very helpful.
We're out of license plates in the gift shop.
Right. So Santa, he goes to the edge of the forest with his elf friend who, we're just going off the rails here, but he lives with this elf friend until his dying day. I can only assume that they are a couple. His elf friend is, which is great, but his elf friend is like the lexicon. Like he can speak every language from like all the languages of the man to like his own, which sounds kind of like a dial-up modem, to birds and things like that. And then he brings him to the edge of the forest, and it's the laughing land, and it's an ice-strewn snow land called like Ho Ha Ho. Is that what it's something like that?
I think it's Ho Ho Ha Ha or something.
Ho Ho Ha Ha. Yeah, so it's like the Laughing Valley or something like that. So and Claus has never seen snow, and he's like, this is amazing. We're gonna live here. And so they set up a shanty shack, and then the next morning, the people of the forest have built him like this beautiful like house. And I guess this village sort of builds around him as he ages. And then he ends up apparently creating toys. Like there's never been a toy before, although it is very clear that the time during which this is happening is like the Middle Ages, because we'll talk about it. And so I guess I'm pretty sure toys existed before then. There definitely dolls existed, and they mention that, but no, he coins them. Okay, so this village has grown up. He's now a charming old fat guy, and he starts building toys for the local kids. And then it goes to the point where like he's building them for everyone, and the forest spirits end up helping him. We're going to talk about some other things in there, because I'm not kidding when I tell you this movie has a lot of crazy shit in it. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is we get very little montages of him like actually aging. In the beginning, obviously, he's a baby, right? And then he is fairly quickly thereafter like a little boy with suspenders, kind of, you know, sort of a, I don't know, like a Swedish Rousseau costume going on. And he's, of course, like the white European Mowgli. You know, like he's having fun with all the immortals and the nature kids and stuff. And then we get one shot of him after he's gone to the Iceland where he is like a Chris Hemsworth, like not as jacked, but he has this perfect like trimmed beard, and he's like, and he's happy and smiling, and the village people are smiling, and we get that
he's like bicep curling a kid or something. Like,
it's like he looks like oh wow, he grew up to be. And then the next shot, like 10 seconds, not even 10 seconds. That's the only, he's no lines in that shot. He has turned into a literal ball with no neck. Like he goes from like Adonis to like 5'4" diabetes sufferer in
really let himself go.
One transition. And there's no explanation whatsoever. So I thought that was interesting. As I said, he lives with this other elf who does a little bit of comic relief. I also, basically, there's so much that just happens because, okay, now he's at this place. Oh, the next thing happens. Like, there's no real rhyme or reason. There's nothing in his past that causes his future, sort of thing. But basically, he runs afoul of the Ogwai, which they make children do bad things, and so they don't want him giving toys to the children of the world or this world because if they're happy, they can't make them do these bad things. And these things are terrifying. For the kids that were scared, like my wife's terrified of when she was little, the abominable snowman in Rudolph. These guys are straight up Lord of the Rings. Like, they're orcs that are blue with like tusks coming out of their lips. And they have these like metal belts. Like, they'd be right next to that like oversexed He-Man action figure, you know, like with a leather belt. So Santa keeps trying to get the toys to the children, but these Ogwai keep jumping him essentially and his crew and stealing all the toys and pouring them in their caverns. So the solution to this, because Santa is non-violent, he was horrified by humans' violence, is the great Ak, the tree guy, comes in and is essentially like, I don't want to do this, but I'm gonna have to kill all these motherfuckers. And he does. He goes back to his forest. He goes into his like his
axe sanctum.
Yeah.
Yes.
He pulls out like this mithril axe, and then he gets his crew, which looks completely hilarious. They literally are the fairies, and they have tree branches that are like just wiggly little twigs with leaves on them, and they start wrecking the Ogwai,
obliterating them.
The Ogwai has a dragon, like this sort of Asiatic Chinese dragon that flies through the air, blows fire, and Klaus's adopted mom, the 12-year-old looking elf, literally just turns the fire back on it and torches it into cinders. There's like, and can we talk about, so they're all off in weird ways, but when we talk about when the great Ak goes to use the axe on some giant monstrosity of an Ogwai, he doesn't hit him with the axe. He brandishes the axe at him, and then a bolt of lightning fires from the axe and incinerates him into like
I need one of those axes.
I didn't know that's how you use an axe. I didn't.
Dude, this is a special axe. This is the axe of the gods.
He even, when he pulls it out of the chest, like when he's preparing for battle, he even tests the sharpness on his thumb. And that's how it's used? Does it matter if it's sharp?
It's like a gun that like shoots knives.
Nathan, we've read Marvel all our lives. You're surprised that someone whipped out something and it shoots lightning. It's like, why would I hit anybody with this when it shoots lightning?
Yeah, and I do want to talk about, this is really beautifully designed. Like, the creatures are all really cool looking. The details are there. They all blink. They all sway. The animal life is 50-50. When the reindeer come thereafter to help Santa after the Ogwai are gone, to help him carry like his load, I actually thought they looked okay compared to his mountain lion mama, who has some real awkward running stages. I know it's tough, but yeah, it looked like an arched cat, like when they're angry, but like running on all fours. Interesting though. It's really interesting. And if they remastered this like they have, you know, so many times, Rudolph or the Red-Nosed Reindeer, they look phenomenal, but we don't really have those remasters of this. And that brings me to why I think we don't have these remasters. Aside from the fact that it's outlandish, and by the way it wraps up is that the reason Ak and his immortals are even talking about Klaus, since Klaus has moved out of town, is because he's on his last day of life where he can bring presents. And Ak is saying, hey, we have one mantle of immortality to give out. Why are we holding on to it? Let's give it to this guy so he can give gifts to children for the rest of eternity because he deserves it. And they do. And that's a sweet moment. But there's this turning point. In the beginning of the movie, Klaus has grown up and he's a young man, or a child really, in this immortal forest, and everything is wonderful. And this is when the great Ak tells him, you know, say goodbye to your mom because I'm taking you on a big journey tomorrow. You're meeting the mortals. And he's like, oh, what's a mortal? And he's like, you're immortal. And he shows him, he does this like anti-It's a Wonderful Life / Ebenezer Scrooge moment, where he takes Klaus to see the most depressing things that the world has to offer at this time. First, he takes them to a field where they're pulling turnips. Again, I don't know where the locations are on these things, but they're pulling turnips, and the serfs are being yelled at by a chancellor, some middle manager body in this medieval kingdom. And a little hungry boy tries to steal a turnip, and he gets caught and yelled at. Then we see the fat family of landowners who are oppressing these guys. I'm going to play a clip in just a moment from that. And then we go to what I thought was actually a non-racist, at least not outwardly racist portrayal of sort of shogun society, and then somewhere in the Middle East at like a bazaar where there are street urchins. So the moral is that in the bazaar, these children are alone. They have no parents, they have no family, and they're just trying to beg for survival, and it's tough. And then in the Shogun era, the kids are these little children are being taught to fight with you know, wooden swords, essentially. So they're not going to really hurt each other necessarily.
I guess my counter to that is like you see the, I guess, generic Europe turnip pickers, whatever that is. And, you know, you hear kind of the peasants kind of making their point, the bourgeoisie making their point. You have this back and forth, and then Great Ack brings him to, you know, Japan, right, and is like, I don't know what they're saying. I don't speak Japanese, but it's really barbaric.
True.
They have swords anyway.
It's true. And essentially what he says they're teaching him, and he sort of defends the father teaching. It's this weird moment because he's defending. Klaus is like, these kids, like, he's like, one kid defeats the other kid and the kid falls over, and he's like, why is he telling them to fight? And then the adult takes the kendo stick, and he's like, or whatever it is, and he attacks the kid, and the kid falls down. He's like, don't attack him. Like, why is he doing this? And the Great Axe says he's teaching them what they'll need to survive in this harsh world. And he looks at him, and there's this pause, and you're like, essentially, he's looking right at him and going, they're doing what we didn't do for you, friend. Like, you have no skills to survive, and this is what we didn't provide to you. So welcome to this new fresh hell that you're going to experience. It was a weird moment.
I think it is funny that early, like at the very start of the film, you do have that moment of Great Ack and the Rosetta Stone elf, who he said something to the Great Ack, and Ack's like, I don't speak any other language. Give it to me in my language.
It does. And that's, and it's an interesting dynamic that Ack has with everyone. And what surprised me is, one, this was made in 1985. It feels older to me. Maybe because it's a Frank L. Baum story and they stuck kind of close to it-ish. It feels a little older, and so I was honestly expecting, when I saw the Shogun children and I saw the Middle Eastern kids running on the bazaar, I expected them to look, to be completely honest, like monsters, and they didn't. They actually, I thought, did a fairly respectful job. They looked just as cartoonish but relatively normal as the other mortal characters. So I give them props for that. And it makes sense because Frank L. Baum's work really was sort of, he always has these satire moments in there. And I think that people who do satire well tend to be aware, even if they are a, quote, product of their time, they tend to be aware of some societal injustices. And this comes down to why I think this film isn't more well known than some of the other films that are of the era and of the style. And it's because of this bleak moment that literally just snatches the wig off capitalism. Let's listen to this moment when they've seen the serfs be the kids sort of chastised, and then we get the fat family eating inside the castle. Here we go.
Why, Rushwell tells me the serfs are acting up again. One of the little brats tried to steal one of my turnips. Imagine.
He only took it because he was hungry. It's fine for you. You've got everything you need. Surely we can do something.
And I hear that another scamp wants to learn to read. Imagine. Next, they'll be wanting to write. You don't want to learn to read or write, do you, Jameson?
Of course not, sir.
I just urinate in your wine. It's just insane. It is insane because it's way, to me, it's heavy-handed, but it is also just way above most people's tolerance, I think, in our country, speaking of the US, for this overt show of classism. It's completely relevant, but I think we're like I just could see parents sitting down I earned my Cadillac. Did they earn their Cadillac? It's just so weird. I don't know if anybody else felt that in that moment, especially when he turns to essentially the house slave and is like, you don't want to read, do you? That's my man. Like,
I was like, eat the rich! Like, yeah.
I know. And Klaus is sort of it turned the whole film to read like sort of socialist propaganda, because then we get to the fact that Santa Claus's entire life's mission then becomes to give toys to everyone. And at one point, the Rosetta Stone elf says something like, he's like, I'm going to give one to Wendy. And she's like, but Wendy's parents are rich. And he goes, everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone gets treated the same. And I'm like, yeah, this ain't going to fly on ABC right now. Like, it's just not. And I don't know, so I've talked a huge amount, but I feel like this film needed this long, drawn-out explanation of the plot, because there's so many. If you just said, oh, it's Santa Claus, like, being found as a child and becoming Santa, it does not do it justice. Let's go to this. Tad, had you seen this movie before?
I had surprisingly not. I thought this was something else. I thought this was going to be the one that I always remembered from every year, Santa's a flaming redhead and he meets Mrs. Claus and all that cool stuff. And then I was like, wait, why is Red Link in this movie? Oh, this has nothing to do. And the funny thing is I was watching this with my wife, and halfway through the movie, she started singing the songs and she's like, oh my God, I've heard these before. I'm like, well, I haven't. So I'm glad someone has watched this. It was kind of a surreal moment. And one, especially with this sort of media, I don't dig too deep into it because I guess I have a perspective in life now where, it hits me more in the whole, there's nothing more beautiful in the world than a happy child. And I'm like, my son's right next to me who's just been born, and it's like, aw, that's right, little man. That's most of what I pull. I mean, yeah, I see a lot of this whole like time to take down the feudalism here thing, but it's one of those times. Nathan, for once, we watched something that's uplifting. Yeah. Let's just enjoy the uplifting aspect of it.
It's true.
And not millennial deconstruct it.
Well, you're gonna lose it out on that. So, and I will say this though, is that Rankin Bass produced this, and they did also produce Rudolph and those other shows. So there's a reason why the stop motion animation looks familiar. It's the same team working on it. The other thing I want to mention too here is the voices. We already mentioned Alfred Drake, but the rest of the voices, most of them are the cast of the original Thundercats. So Mum-Ra's in there as Santa, Chitara, they're mostly in there, and Silverhawks if that was your thing. So if you're a child of the 80s and you love those shows, The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus is definitely worth a watch, because it's that moment times 10 when you're watching an anime or something, and you're like, wait a minute, that's Hero. And you're like, no, that's Krillin or whatever. Greg, what about you? Had you seen this film, and what is your take on it?
Watching it, I wasn't entirely sure. Like Tad, I mean, I definitely drew the parallels to, I think it's Santa Claus is Coming to Town. That's the other one where he's a sprightly redhead. But yeah, I think I'd seen it before, maybe once. I found it so bizarre because Santa Claus is Coming to Town came out in 1970, 15 years before this.
Yeah.
And this just kind of felt like a kind of a cheap knockoff, but by the same company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the last one they did in this style. This was their final one. I do think I was looking side to side between many of them. And I do think a big part of the appearance difference, the reason why it feels so old, is because it has never been truly remastered. And it leads to not only some foggy visuals, if that's the appropriate term, just some graininess, but also it just makes some of the jankiness stand out. And it's hard for me to judge what was truly janky and maybe, you know, like, oh, this movement's not right, or this is whatever, because some of the touches are still there. Like the eyes, you know, a lot of characters cry in this one, which is really impressive for stop motion animation because they're essentially using some physical media to create the drop. And it's effective, but yeah, it's a little harder to watch because it feels so dated, and it's so much because of the quality of the presentation. And I wish that we could see, you know, this completely remastered.
But also, I mean, to that end, like, would that cheapen it? Like, you know, I like a lot of those stop motion Christmas films, you know, Jack Frost, Rudolph, Year Without a Santa Claus. And so, you know, maybe this is just kind of the Cars 2 of the Christmas stop motion films for me, where, you know, it's still a Pixar movie, you know, I still enjoy it enough. But yeah, like this, like Ted said, I mean, this was cute. It was wholesome. It was fun. I don't know if I'll watch it every Christmas, but like if people are like, hey, like I've seen all of them. I'm like, oh, have you seen The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus? And then I'll pop this on and they'll think it's Santa Claus is coming to town and then be shocked. So
I appreciate that Cars 2 reference because good Lord, that movie's an abomination.
We're going to have to talk about Cars 2 at some point in more detail. But we're going to move on to Mandy. Mandy, had you seen this film?
I had not seen this film before.
What is your take after having watched it?
I think I also thought it was Santa Claus is coming to town. Common theme.
That's why I sent you guys, before we did this, I sent a message saying, you're going to be, something like, I'm excited, this is crazy. Because, and especially, like I said, the cover does not do it any, the cover looks like Christmas. The movie does not look like Christmas. So it continues.
Okay. So, I both appreciated and did not like the divergence from like the normal Santa Claus stories. Like I was like, this is really interesting. A+ for creativity, but also, do you know like what story you're writing like about Santa? Like it was very disjointed. And it was good that you mentioned the whole weirdness about them deciding to name him Claus, because that felt super clunky and really, I think, destroyed my suspension of disbelief. I just can't. You had me up until there. No, like this whole dumb naming scheme
and that's
thing.
probably in the first 8 minutes.
I'm out.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
So what's interesting too is I keep going back. What stuck with me was the Ogwai, right? Because they're the mean ones that are trying to, because we don't really understand. Everything else gets a fairly like nuanced touch, like, well, humans, the inhumanity of man to man, and like they have to learn to survive, and you have to, you know, you've brought light into this world through this, and children of the future, all these things. And then you have the Ogwai, who are sort of Native American-esque in this, because like Axe shows up to say, hey, you've been hassling this Claus guy, and he's under my protection, and that's almost verbatim. And the Ogwai are like, we don't bow to you. We don't bow to anyone. And he's like, you're right, but you better lay off. And they're like, no, it's war. And to be fair, right? Like, I mean, of course, the excuse is that they're making children do bad things. But we don't know why they're making, like, what is the background on them? Because they were clearly there before. And then they get obliterated, and the like 4 main ones go running off at the end of the battle. And then we don't see what happens to them, but the Great Act then comes back to Claus and says, they have perished. And you're just like, oh, like, did you just corner him in an out valley somewhere and wipe him out? Like, I'm
Keep them
uncomfortable with this.
Fox Canyon Massacre.
Yeah.
I'll give my interpretation on this. Note that they said we're as powerful as you, except they're not. But clearly, they stated that, and it looked like to me it was an allegory of these are the primordial creatures that essentially corrupt children to become the bad people that that Ack highlighted. He's like going through like, yeah, these people, they're kind of jerks, and it turns out this is why they enjoy corrupting humanity and making them do horrible things. And, now the world's a whole bunch of piles of shit. And they're like, oh, we're going to throw some hope into this Santa guy in hopes that he will, make children better, or because they'll get toys,
Yeah, I wish that and I think you're right. I do think that that's probably the intent, because, and to the credit of Ack and everyone, they say, when Ack confronts them and says, leave Klaus alone, they say, in fact, no, we're not going to. And in fact, when we catch him again, we're going to kill him. Because before they would just rough him up and take his stuff. And so, to be fair, they did threaten to kill him. And it's sort of like, there is no beyond that, right? Like, what do you do? But when Ack shows up there and is like, beforehand, and is like, it's going to be war, which Klaus does not participate in, by the way. He's not there during the battle. Ack leaves and Santa Claus sheds a tear, and it's like the moment that he is pure, because he didn't like battle before, because Ack has told him about war and is horrified, right? And I would have loved to see some act of kindness on his part on behalf of the Ogwai, even if it was a remembrance or something, like everyone treated it the same. You know what I mean? Like that would have been the next level of beauty, right? Because we're also kind of seeing Klaus as a Christ figure in this, right? Because there's no religiousness in this. But even in the beginning, when he first goes to the frozen wastes and he's like, we're going to live here, he sets up a shanty, and it shows him sleeping in like hay, it looks like hay, or at least maybe I'm remembering it that way, with the mountain lion and the elf. And I couldn't help but think, because of the iconography we're so familiar with, it looked like Jesus in the manger. And we get that. And then we get the little time, like you said, Mandy, the details and creativity of how they worked everything in was kind of interesting, because Santa knows that it's his last Christmas when we get to that point. And he walks out with his elf and the mountain lion, who apparently is immortal too, because that would be too brutal. If the mountain lion died, I couldn't handle it. And there's a tree there, and he's putting ornaments, toys on it. And he says, I'm mortal. I am going to die, but the hangings on this tree or whatever will help you remember me when I'm gone. And the elf is like, we will do this every year for you and never forget you. And it's this sweet moment, and also it gives us the explanation of the Christmas tree. But I thought that was kind of a beautiful moment, and I almost was wondering, I'm like, we have to have Santa immortal, because that seems to be the point of this, right? Is that's how Santa's still here. But it almost felt like Santa was made peace with his death. I was like, how is this going to happen? Because I wasn't sure. And then, of course, he gets the mantle bestowed upon him, essentially without asking. He could very in the real world, he could very much not be happy with this. We don't know. But I thought that was an interesting approach, is that these immortals are saving Santa, and it does point to the idea, Tad, that you raised, where he's sort of the one bringing joy and goodness back into the world, and so he deserves to be there forever, to sort of be the Christ figure that is literally saving everyone by providing this service for
well, and
all
also
eternity.
it's a story where he's a baby. Fast forward, he did some good stuff. Okay, he's an adult, and here's where he dies on the cross for
There's
you.
the 33 years in the middle or whatever. Yeah. So it was an interesting bit.
I did also want to bring up, I think it's crazy. I almost blacked out the battle scene, but yeah, great act. Starts off and kind of shows, Santa like, oh, here's all the misery of humankind. Look at them messing among themselves. And then, oh yeah, but we forgot there's these like evil orcs that have been like corrupting them for years. And we just kind of, I don't know, lived in the forest, but now we're here and we're really mad.
Yeah, it was totally like I had Braveheart moments where yeah, like, well, people were being bad, but now Mel Gibson's here and it's a different story and he has two hand axes. Yeah, like it was sort of this insane
Fucking
flip.
amazing. Did you? I don't know if anyone else did this when The Rock came through the window. I was like, oh shit, Santa didn't pay his protection money.
So when the Ogwai first reveal themselves by throwing a literal rock with a note tied to it through the window.
Why don't they put a bag of flaming dog poop on his porch while they're at it?
It was the weirdest, and also I'm like, this is like, I'm sorry. Here's what we had in Vision. They also have, in addition to the mountain lion at this point, they have a little black cat, and then they have a roaring fire, and then you have a bald, overweight man with a beard who's very hairy, and a little tiny elf. And a rock goes through the window. And all I could think of is, this is a hate crime. This is a hate crime. There's this nice same-sex couple that just moved into the neighborhood, and these big bullies don't like them there, and they threw a rock through their window. And I don't know, and it seems like an interesting exclusion to exclude any sort of Mrs. Claus in this at all. I know that the story it's based on, such, but it seems like a glaring error to have this man live his entire life and have no desire for partnership. Of course it happens. Asexuality is psychologists jump. This is a thing. I get it. It's just as weird in this lexicon that we have to see this story where that's completely absent. And yet he still isn't by himself, and he's not just with pets. He is with this tiny elf who does nothing but talk at him.
Tingler.
Yeah, it just seemed like a stereotype. So I think we're going to start the recommendations here. I will start with this one. So I recommend The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. And again, it's The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, not The Life and Times of Santa Claus. That is different. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, 1985, to anyone who likes stop motion animation. It's really cool to see essentially a feature length, or at least a long short, 50 minutes, with these really neat creature designs from a team that's done it for many years and that we aren't familiar with, because we're so familiar with many of the other Christmas stop motion animation films and the more contemporary ones like James and the Giant Peach, Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, those things. It's really cool to find one that I had never seen before, and there's a lot to like. I think the Ogwai designs especially are super neat, and it's straight out of D&D second edition, first edition, etc. So yeah, that's what I recommend this to. Also, you need to be open in theology. If you're looking for a Christmas with some sort of religious story, good luck. You will not find it here. Conversely, if you like this sort of insane take on Santa Claus, check out the Mexican film production, just called Santa Claus. And it's been done by both Mystery Science Theater in a slightly edited form and Riff Tracks. And that is absolute batshit crazy film. Merlin is in it. Santa Claus lives on like a cloud planet. There's a giant seeing eyebot. It is one, and he fights the devil. That is literally, it's 100% madness. It's brilliant. Totally watch it. I can't express to you how insane it is. So if you like The Life and Adventure,
have credits on it?
No, it's live action. If The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus pushes you to watch more madness, go watch Santa Claus. Greg, who would you recommend The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus to, and why?
I mean, I liked it overall. If you're a fan of like Christmas or vaguely holiday themed films, I'd say give this a try. It's a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life dipped into Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and then they accidentally spilled the Bible on it and tried to quickly scoop it out. Like it was good, it was cute, but I would say if you want to kind of go a little more mainstream with your kind of bizarre Santa stories, check out Rise of the Guardians from DreamWorks, also based off of a kid's book. Check out I think it was Klaus on Netflix. That was like a year or two ago.
I also enjoyed that one.
That was amazing. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of holiday movies and you kind of want to see something from a very different time, like, give this a watch. It's fun enough, and it's, what, like 50 minutes?
50 minutes. Yep.
Yeah, you're in and out before you can even ask what. So
that's what she said.
And right, Tad, who would you recommend The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus to, and why?
if you were a kid like me that grew up and you had seen Santa Claus the movie and you needed to see a movie, the second weirdest Santa movie ever, this is it. Because the only thing weirder than this was the Santa Claus movie with Dudley Moore, because I still don't know why that movie exists. I still remember it. And I'm like, why? But there it is.
I'm gonna hazard to say there are even more, but we're gonna get into that later this month on Cult and Classic Podcast. All right. Mandy, who would you recommend The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus to, and why?
No, I think I go with a little what you said, Nate, a little what Greg said. Like, want to try something different for Christmas? Not super religious. Like, this is a good one to mix it up with. Super cute, great character design, great animation, like classic stop motion, fun, different characters and twists on the story. So, but it's not like super well written. I mean, some cases, and it's a little bit clunky in some of, you know, as you mentioned, and like it played some clips and stuff. So it's like, there's a lot of really great elements there. It's definitely dated, but fun to mix it up for like some classic movies, maybe put on in the background or something.
All right. Well, and I just want to throw in there too, Tad mentioned this earlier, that Klaus kind of looks like red-capped Link from Legend of Zelda, like the Minish Cap era. I think that's true. And actually, if you like especially the sort of late 90s, mid 90s Legend of Zelda from sort of the N64 up, especially the things like Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild, I think you will enjoy the aesthetics of this, because the way that those games sort of started to use the geometric nature of polygonal graphics to their benefit by working geometry into their designs, that felt like this in many ways. The elves are very smooth. The mortals and the characters that are more mortal-like or more masculine are very angular, like Ack. They definitely have, you know, rooms full somewhere of moldering designs for this movie that I would love to see, that unfortunately we may not get to see, but I'm sure that they're out there. So if you are a member of the estate of any of those designers, please reach out to cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back at you with A Cosmic Christmas. Hey, Cult and Classic crew, friends and fiends of the pod, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Nate, I don't have any money, and if I did, I'd be spending it on cool things like buttons and custom trading cards and zines that are unique and made each week by the Cult and Classic podcast family. And guess what? You can do both of those things at once. You can support cultandclassicpodcast.com and get awesome swag like buttons and custom trading cards that are printed on actual trading card stock by actual trading card printers and autographed by the artist, and also zines like classic issues of Rearted with comics and illustrations and interviews, as well as brand new Cult and Classic Podcast family publications that are brand new, so you'll get them first in line. These are awesome, awesome things that you can get just by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Cult and Classic Podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get videos of our episodes, so you can see all our lovely shining faces, as well as exclusive content like extra episodes, film reviews, book reviews, and things like commentary by us on our short films, which you'll also be able to see. If you want to pay a little more, $5 a month per se, US, then you get an awesome autographed custom trading card. These are official, printed at the same place that prints every other trading card you've ever bought, and they're autographed by the artist. These are exclusively for Cult and Classic Podcast and inspired by our episodes. You can't get them anywhere else except through us. Only $5 a month, you get it shipped right to you. Shipping is free. If you pay $10 a month, if you are a true drinker of the Kool-Aid for cultandclassicpodcast.com, then you will get the trading card, access to all of the content that is exclusive to Patreon members, and you will get a brand new zine every month, whether it's a classic copy of Rearted zine with interviews, comics, art, all sorts of cool stuff, or brand new Cult and Classic Podcast family publications. Those will get sent straight to your door. Plus, there's usually extras like pins, stickers, all sorts of cool stuff. So you're doing two great things. You are spending money on awesome swag, and you are supporting Cult and Classic Podcast. I know it's tough right now in the pandemic. If you can do it, join us at Cult and Classic Podcast Patreon. If you can't, why don't you recommend it to a friend? We all have those rich friends, and they can spread it around a little more. I'm just going to say it. All right? Thank you so much. And as always, Cult and Classic Podcast loves you. And we are back. I am really, really excited to talk about this one. And I don't know how everybody else is going to feel, but A Cosmic Christmas from 1977. This is a weird one. It's a 26-ish minute short that was produced by Nelvana, which is a Canadian animation company. It also was part of a later compilation in 1980 that Nelvana put out called Nelvanimation, which was a movie-length collection of 4 of their shorts. And Clive Smith directed all of those 4. Clive Smith directed this one. Clive Smith is sort of probably most well known for directing, well, he directed a lot of cartoons, a lot of cartoon features, and my favorite is 1983's Rock and Rule, which we will absolutely do on this podcast because it is a true crime against God that it has not been watched and known by every single person on the planet. Now, he also did a lot of other weird little neat things like Madball's Gross Jokes and all the shorts, Escape from the Orb in the 80s. Remember Madballs, those little monster heads?
Oh my God, Madballs.
Yeah, he produced the Beetlejuice cartoon, which is a fantastic cartoon.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pedigree behind his name, and it's recognized in this. And I'm going to say that this film is... I think this film is wonkier in some ways than The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, because when you watch this movie, it takes place in like that sort of 70s that we all see, like we saw in Cruisin', and it's like this sort of gritty, urban, but somehow rural feeling. Like it could have taken place in like the outskirts of Chicago in 1970. You know, everything is a little rough, but everyone also knows each other. And it's a weird way to start out a holiday animated short. The story itself is that you have this little kid, Peter, who's running around town with his pet goose. And I forget the goose's name.
Lucy.
Lucy, thank you. And he and Lucy are wandering around. They're the kind ones. They're just the happy kids. And Peter sees essentially a spaceship in the sky and tries to point it out to everyone, and no one gives a shit. The neighborhood kind of bully, rough and tumble kids tease him about it, and then they fall on his goose. And the goose, being a goose, in case anyone has never met a goose, gooses are literal Satans covered in feathers. I like geese, but he starts a rumble, and these like 4 kids are rumbling with Lucy the goose, and Peter grabs Lucy and runs away, and the head kid who's got the long hair and the narrow eyes and kind of like the wise guy, he's like, I'm gonna get that goose. And so then Peter finds the actual alien ship, which is a little ominous. It's a big red orb, sort of very fire in the sky. Like D.B. Sweeney like is having flashbacks here because the thing comes down, the door opens, and out step 3 aliens that move sort of like there's trails behind the animation cells, so it looks like they're sort of dreamy and swirly, like how the vampires moved in Queen of the Damned, you know? And
the sorceresses in Final Fantasy VIII.
Okay, yes, that also is accurate. And one of them, by the way, Lexicon. It's Lexicon, Amalthor, and I think Snark are their names. And Richard M. Davidson does the voice of Lexicon, who I believe is the main one. It's hard to tell because they're kind of supposed to be the 3 magi, I guess. Reading notes, I don't so much see that, but we'll talk about that. He was Dracula in 1978's Monster Squad movie. So there's an interesting carry there. If you can hear that, I commend you, because I didn't really hear it. Now that I know, I can hear it. So these aliens meet him, and they're like, well, we're here because, hundreds of years ago, there was a star that got brighter in this system. and it's seen from tons of planets, and we're trying to find out what it meant. And he's like, oh, you must mean the Star of Bethlehem. And this is the one snippet of religion that comes into this movie, in a movie that is really freaking bizarre and sort of off the wall when it comes to religion. He's like, oh, well, that was when Jesus was born. That's what you must mean. And he gave us Christmas. And they're like, oh, well, then I guess we need to find out what Christmas is. So he takes them around town after telling these three aliens that Christmas is about love, I think caring for one another, and peace. And of course, because it's the 70s, every single place that the kid stops by, like the shop, he looks like, they always have Christmas in the window at this shop. The shop owner comes out and he's cursing and he gets tangled in his like wreath, and he's just, every single thing he shows them, they're like, is this peace? And it's clearly not peace. He's like, is this caring for other people? And like, it's just the most depressing cavalcade of unhappy people during the holidays. And then
all it needs is just a trombone in the back for every scene.
Yeah, totally. And so he's like, kind of. It's like, there's one more place that could have like holiday spirit. And he goes home. He walks into the room. His grandmother is making stuff for the tree, like of this little origami angel where if you pull it, the wings get, spread. And the parents look at her like, you don't have to buy anything anymore, Grandma. Like, I mean, you don't have to build anything, just buy it. And she said, you can't buy everything. And they're like, oh, this crazy Grandma. And then the kid comes home and he's like, I brought guests. And the dad like turns on a dime and is like, how many times have I told you not to talk to strangers? And then the three aliens come in. And of course, they're all like, holy crap, these are aliens. Then they have this kind of fun moment where the grandmother is telling the aliens what Christmas was like when she was young. And it's really beautiful. And there's like the tree's decorated and it's a real tree and the presents are not. She doesn't talk about the presents at all. There's like, streamers and a fireplace. It's just, and like huge amounts of food. And one of the aliens is doing this thing where he's kind of creating the illusion around them. It's a neat moment.
Am I the only one who was creeped out by that whole scene?
Oh,
like
the psychedelic, it looks like they're spraying gas into the room, sort of.
Yeah, I thought it was freaky as hell. I mean, like the aliens, I think you're right. They looked really cool, but it also made me motion sick to watch them for more than a few seconds.
Greg, I got a fucking movie for you later. If you
Okay.
want something in this vein, yeah.
So
I want to be sick.
I would say that maybe it's the fact that we're still in 2020, and if a stranger with a monster face walked into my house and said, I've got a magic power to make you see wonderful things and be happy, I'd be like, sign me up, strap me in. What do you got to do? You have to pith my brain? Let's go. I don't know. But yeah, so that's a moment. But of course, it's wrecked when Lucy gets snagged as Peter goes out to get wood by the mean kid, the bad kid. And is the bad kid Marvin, I think is his name? But he takes Lucy because he's going to have himself a goose dinner, which is kind of gruesome, right? I mean, a goose is, of course, a traditional dinner for Christmas, although most of us, I don't think, have it anymore. But he runs off and he goes on like this E.T. bike chase with this goose. And the family's chasing him. And at this point, the townspeople have rallied up with the like super sort of French hard private eye out of a Luc Besson movie, police chief and the mayor, who I don't know what planet the mayor's from because he looks like a monster. He has like these look like bright red dreadlocks sticking out from the back of his head, and his fingers are like little claws. Really weird. But he's of course panicking the whole time for God knows why. He's scared of aliens, I guess. But they've confronted.
It's the mayor from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Very much so, yes. But like if you took Quaaludes, then he would be the mayor from Nightmare Before, because this guy is ramped up. And you've got, so at this point in time, as Peter is chasing Marvin with Lucy and his family's running behind him and the aliens are then trailing behind, you've got the townspeople with the mayor and the police chief confronting the orb that's just parked there, essentially. And they're yelling at it and giving a 10 count. And then Marvin bikes right through them, and Peter runs through and is like, "Stop him!" And the dad's like, "Thief!" And the cop goes, "Thief? Now that's something I can get," or like robbery. That's something I can get behind. And then they just start taking off after that. And
Fuck these aliens.
Exactly. And they chase. And what happens is Marvin goes flying with Lucy, and they fall onto the frozen river, which gives way. And Lucy flies out or hops out, but Marvin is stuck. Sort of trying to escape this frozen water hole. And the first thing that happens is Peter doesn't stop at all. He just goes to try and save him, but he can't reach him. And then he falls in too. And then they're both falling in, and essentially the police chief does what you would hope a police chief would do. I'm a little skeptical these days, but he's like, let's form a human chain. We got to get these kids out. And then they can't reach, and he sees the three shadows on the hill, and he's like, hey guys, we need your help. Get down here. And they're like, well, we can't interfere. But then they're like, maybe, but we need to understand Christmas. And so they go and they help and they rescue the kids. They're the three that stretch the gap. And then they understand Christmas, and the main alien smiles at one point. And there's this cool moment, which, I mean, yes, it's cheesy, but like you said, this is an uplifting week. It's kind of shocking, where everyone turns against Marvin, as frankly, I would, right? Like, he just tried to kill this kid's goose, or steal him and kill this kid's goose, right? And they're like, he belongs in jail. Why did you do this? Like, they're really nasty. And of course, their faces are really ugly at this point. And why would you do this? You know, because he's bad. And then the grandma, who's been sort of the sweet voice, says, or because he's hungry. And essentially then they're like, oh, and the family invites Marvin for Christmas, and he's like, no. And Peter convinces him. So all of the sort of, essentially they seem like homeless kids, right? Join for the big festivities, and the whole town is in the house, and they're all having a good time. And then the aliens are like, oh, we get Christmas. And then they fly off. And it's a nice moment. This film feels like Heavy Traffic by Ralph Bakshi, which is one of my favorite movies. But if you haven't seen it, it is a grimy, weird, trippy, depressing, mixed version of like what it's like to live in the middle of a city, frankly poor, or at least not rich. And that's what it felt like. It's like this kind of happy story in this weirdly bleak, gritty, you know, everyone's just kind of tired and haggard and meh world. And so I think the intent was that these aliens have sort of helped them rediscover the meaning of Christmas by asking what the meaning of Christmas is. And I think that that's a nice message. It's just such a weird thing to base a Christmas story on. And when I saw that people were saying, oh, the three aliens are supposed to be the three wise men, I'm like, okay, well, if that's true, how does that factor into the story? Like, does that make Peter Jesus because he's trying to show people the right way? I mean, kind of, not really. He's sort of he's a kid. He doesn't have any power really, right? Like, he's not calling the shots.
Clearly it's Lucy.
Lucy. Yeah. And Lucy is, of course, the comedy relief in a lot of it. Like, I thought it was cute. I thought it worked. Oh, and the aliens have an unnamed little creature with them as well, which doesn't seem to, it's treated like a pet. Like, it doesn't have a name or anything. It's just a couple of eyes floating. It's sort of like the Booster Gold from DC Comics has his assistant or whatever, who's actually like more powerful. And I forget what he's called. This is, my DC Stan card is revoked, but he looks very similar to him. And he just floats around, and he can change his shape, and sort of, he seems like he's going to help, but then sometimes he seems like he thinks Lucy's like really delicious looking to eat, and like he's going to eat Lucy in the background. Something, it's a weird thing to throw in there. But I guess aliens needed a pet too, to humanize them somehow. So I've got some other stuff I want to talk about, but first I'm gonna give you guys a chance. Greg, what did you expect going into this, and what was your take on it afterward?
Well, I mean, I expected anything, as always. Afterward, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, this was even shorter than the last one. This is what, 26 minutes-ish? And yeah, it's fun. It's weird. it was enjoyable. It was strange enough to keep me interested, but not so out there that I like felt myself drifting away because I couldn't follow anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's short of half an hour. It's also pretty well paced, I felt. Like everything is introduced very quickly. You don't dwell on anything long, and it's clear that they've worked on a lot of shows before because it's formatted like a 25 or so minute show. You cut between characters cross paths. It's sort of a natural way. It fits the conventions a little more than maybe The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus in its presentation. So even though it was made or it came out 8 years before The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, I find this one feels much more contemporary. Even though it clearly takes place in the 70s with the fashion. And also the animation style is very 70s. If you don't know, like if someone's listening and doesn't really understand what that means, think of like the Keep on Truckin' poster and everything it's line art. There's not a lot of line weight variation in the artwork. Everyone has a little bit of a mop top except for the cop who's got a crew cut and big eyes, sort of,
Feels ziggy.
Huh?
Everything feels ziggy.
Yeah,
Their eyebrows are in their hair.
Yeah, very R. Crumb inspired.
A lot of them don't have shoes. Like
yeah. And can we just
their
talk about...
Their pants go right to the bottom of their feet.
So we can just talk about the 4 kids who are like the bad kids. And at first they just seem like jerks. And I mean, I guess they kind of are jerks. But then you see them like in their hovel and you don't know. They're clearly either homeless or I guess more likely like latchkey kids who don't really have parents because they're joking around with each other. And there's like the heavy one. And it's funny because when they first show up and they're giving Peter a hard time, I didn't notice the details like the big kid, he has holes in his shirt. And like the other kid he hasn't like ratty shoes or something. And like the joke, like, what are you gonna have for Christmas dinner? And he's like, same thing as I always have, nothing, ha ha ha. And they all laugh. And you're just like, oh, this is depressing. Like these kids are hard up. But I just want to talk about the one girl in the group. Her fashion was awesome. She's like got a like platinum white afro that like goes over her eyes. You can't even see her face. And I'm like, this is runway today. Like that is fantastic. I don't know where this design stepped out of, but it was like Donna Summer meets Woodstock. It's just a weird vibe. I dug it. Yeah. So where were we at? Mandy, what was your take of this film? And had you ever seen it?
Oh, I'd seen this one tons of times. What are you talking about? Not seen this one. I was like actually expecting for the kid to go into space with the whole cosmic part of it. Like I was like, oh, spaceship, like, he's gonna go on a trip to the stars and there's gonna be some real big twist on the whole Christmas story. But it was interesting to have the parallel to the 3 wise men in these aliens. Like Nate didn't quite get where they were going with that, but like the feeling was there that that was what they were trying for. I really liked the pacing. I liked the flow of the story. Like it felt very natural. It fit in the 22 minutes, like you said. It was really good. But I hated the kind of like, it felt very like Christian propaganda, kind of, even though there wasn't a lot of religion to it, but it was just like, here's your excuse to be shitty to people all the rest of the year, because all you have to do is be nice to them and give them food on Christmas. That's so kind of how I felt.
Because when he says Star of Bethlehem, I instantly thought, oh, it is very Christian. But I'm gonna rub against that and say that I think there's a very strange anti-religion sentiment here in a weird way. And I'm going to play this clip. This is right before Peter enters the house with the aliens and his dad curses at him before he sees the guests come in. This is the grandma. This is the mom talking, and then it's the grandma. So let's listen to this.
You don't think he went looking for that flying saucer thing, do you?
Land sakes, flying saucers. Space folk. What nonsense.
As she's saying this is when she is finished making the angel that when she pulls the tab, the wings fly. The grandma is literally saying, space folk, you know, aliens, looking at the thing. What nonsense is this? It was so on the nose. I was like, whoa, like, I'm sorry. If I were a very religious person, which I am certainly not, that would offend me, because that is somebody, and I assume it's Clive Smith as the director, is well aware with what he's doing at that moment. Because, I'm sorry, it's essentially saying Jesus is a space person. And it's sort of like this weird, tongue-in-cheek, like, I got paid to make a Christmas special, you know?
Yeah.
And it totally, I went back and watched it mid-show, because I was like, whoa, like, that was so on the nose. And also, it's interesting to me because I don't know that they say Jesus, I think, but we never, it's sort of like the idea of it is not really explored at all. It's just about like the caring for others and the peace and the love. And so I see how they could kind of get away with being like, well, everyone can kind of get a message out of this. And we also can make these folks happy by saying Star of Bethlehem, blah, blah, blah. And it's a convenient use to use cosmology and cosmological event to bring aliens in. But yeah, I got a very sort of one of two options. Either it is religious and they're saying get back to the roots, or what I found a little more likely, and maybe this is too because I have more of a background in Clive Smith's previous work, was, hey, look what religion's gotten you. A whole lot of nothing. What do you remember, about religion day to day? You're miserable, you're cranky, your kids are God knows where, do they even have parents? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, nobody here is living a quote unquote Christian life. And it's completely pointless. And so you just have to make do. And so it's just a weird, I feel like you can make an argument either way.
I'm definitely with you on the Jesus is a space alien thing.
Sure.
I mean, I thought the three wise men being aliens, as soon as they showed up and I saw how they looked, I started laughing. I was like, is this the movie that's going to teach the controversy of Jesus is a space alien? Like, it's...
What I didn't tell you guys is that this was produced by Dianetics. Yeah, no, I think it's just an interesting thing. And the idea of subverting the Christian iconography of the wise men, because I think, Mandy, maybe because I thought it too before I saw it, but I sort of discarded it because I'm like, they don't really follow any of the plot tenets of the wise men, is that I'm like, oh, it's the fact that they're always three together. And by aliens who travel through space, I think our first thought because of film and media and stuff is, oh, they're highly intelligent. So you literally get the idea of the wise things, the intelligent aliens, and they're always together as the three wise men. And it's sort of using that Christian iconography that we've been ingrained into us to this weird end of like sort of the idea of people who aren't religious telling someone who's being Christian but picketing at like a gay wedding or something. It's like, this isn't very Christian kindness of you. You know what I mean? It's sort of that weird, like, let's take something familiar and use it against what we don't like about this. And so it's an interesting one. And I felt a similar way with, I think you can make the argument, and there's been lots of books and papers written on it with, C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series, which is, it instantly turns off a lot of people who want, who disagree with Christianity. But then when you parse it out, there's a lot of very sort of almost Judaic methodology of questioning in it that sort of becomes blasphemous to someone who's super, hardwired to be evangelical. And I thought I always think that's interesting when people subvert the expectation like that, because it can change people's minds in such a persuasive manner because they're not aware it's changing their mind. I'm not sure if that's the case with this one. It's a 26-minute short with a goose in it. Tad, what was your take on Cosmic Christmas?
That's a complicated question, because I'm sure of all people, that my relationship with Christmas has been very complicated throughout my entire life. I worked in retail long enough, as did you, where you see not the worst of humanity. Let's face it, we haven't actually seen the worst of humanity, but we see the worst of polite society
Yes.
around the holidays, which is ironic, but also, let's face it, that's just the way it is.
They got to get that Turbo Man doll.
Oh my fucking god! See, now we're talking about real Christmas movies. As someone who's sort of in the past few years had a kind of a renaissance of enjoying Christmas, finding that true meaning of Christmas. Oh no, I found the true meaning. And also kind of having a resurgence of my faith, which is a complicated subject of which is not appropriate for this podcast.
I don't want to hear about your crazy booga booga ideas.
You really no, we're not ready to get into that right now.
Kidding.
But you know, as a punk rocker who also basically is Catholic and also really just enjoys asking the question all the time. This is one of those things. I sat down and I really enjoyed this on all angles because I was kind of taken aback by the fact that he basically was just like, oh, that's when Jesus Christ was born. I'm like, where's this gonna go? And it went nowhere. And it was basically it just threw it out and was like, that's the way it is. And then we're not going to talk about it anymore. So it was like, I guess that was kind of the best way for them to handle it.
Well, it sort of makes sense, right? Because that is the kid's take on it, right?
It is. It's a kid's take.
What are you going to, because there's that old, David Sedaris calls it the reflexive language, to give of thyself one's only son. You know, like that whole idea of sacrifice with Christianity does not compute with children. Because there's not a sense of self that's strong enough yet to understand mine, yours, give, take. There is only share and gift. Like those are the two things that they understand. And let's be honest, those are the two things that most of us understand. And the idea of sort of this, I'm going to go out and say, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but the very old school archaic idea of blood sacrifice to relieve sins is sort of crazy in polite society, even if among the religious people. So to talk about that with a kid wouldn't make any sense.
There's so much there's actually a lot that you can really dig into if you really want to. But I mean, you were at my wedding, you heard my vows and all that. You heard I
wasn't listening. I'm just kidding.
There's a deep level to all of this that it's like you can't expect a child to understand the layers of thousands of years of tradition and thousands of years of philosophical thought. So it's just about, you know, feeling good and you know, giving to people. And there is that element of, I feel like there's an element of sacrifice in both of these movies. It's just, it can't get into the depth that I can understand because these are kind of supposed to be geared towards kids. Well, I don't think Cosmic Christmas was honestly geared towards kids. This was a fucking acid trip of a movie. This was more like that scene in the beginning where the people are arguing and you remember back in the day when there were actual physical gift wrappers, you brought your shit to some person who wrapped your shit for you. Remember when that was a thing? That reminded me of back when I was working retail, and it's like, wow, I hate all you motherfuckers. This had ruined Christmas for me because I genuinely, even as a kid, I was just like, I really don't want
let's pour out a fourth for Black Friday's past.
Oh my God. I feel bad for every person who still has to work that because I've worked Black Fridays and they're nightmares. I mean, I've had people walk up to me and try and bribe me to get things. And it's like, do you realize I'd lose my job? So why are you even asking me? It's also
there were times when I would have taken those. Had anybody offered that, I'm like, that actually sounds like the best retirement package I have right now. Because Hot Topic's not going to give me any more than that.
No, dude, I was working at Walmart. It was like $250 for me to pull out the what the hell was that PlayStation handheld that no one cared about? Not the Vita.
PSP. It was a nice device.
PSP. Yeah, someone tried it. It was like, I'll give you $200 to get that freaking PSP out. I'm like, no. Also, no. And it's also 4 a.m. and my brain's not working. No, thank you.
So, I like the idea that, I hadn't really thought of this, but I like the idea, if we dig that deep and say Peter's relating of what Christmas is to the aliens is sort of all you really need, right? Like, we're no longer, well, I was going to say we're no longer serfs working under the overlordship, but that's perhaps too far stretched to say. I think we might be, but this podcast isn't. But his sort of, what else do we need, right? Do we really need all that other stuff that is essentially archaic versus what Peter, this little boy, has, which is just, yeah, it's a great time when everybody's happy and nice to each other and we give each other things. Come look. Like, that's such a beautiful moment. And of course, even he is aware enough to every time he shows them something, be like, oh, God damn it. Like, every time, it's just, there's this one time when he looks towards the camera and just like rolls his eyes when the alien again says like, is this caring for other people? Like, they're genuinely asking. And he's like, ugh. Like,
no, hold on. We'll go down the street. I'll find it.
Yeah, like, just keep coming, you know? And it was a nice moment. It's a nice thing because everyone else gets all involved. And I thought this was an interesting moment too, with the grandma, where the grandmother is the one that's the kindest, but also clearly the most religious. And it's sort of, it's this weird thing. It makes me think of those people, like, especially the older generations, where you meet them and there's extreme kindness, and then they can say something so insanely racist or classist that is just their self-awareness has, and there are younger people like this too, of course, their self-awareness has not breached that like wall. Like, the kindness stops where their ingrained dogma begins. And I like that Peter doesn't seem to have that. He has no fear of the aliens. Like, he's a little like, and they're like, hi. And he's like, oh, hi. Okay. This is my goose. Can we also talk? Oh,
no, wait, hold on. These movies both have the same theme, which is, and it's the same theme in a lot of religions too. It's in Buddhism. You know, Buddhism says life is suffering. The world is shit. And both of these movies have a message of you must persevere despite the fact that it's full of shit. The God of the Woods basically said life's shit. And this little kid showed aliens life's shit. But you still have to try and be the best person you can be anyway, because otherwise you're just part of the problem.
Yeah, that's an incredibly cynical message, but it does pan out in both cases. I think that really does pan out. I wanted to bring it back to just the fact that, can we talk about why his pet is a goose? I didn't understand that at all, and then I was like, oh, it's Canada. And I think that might be somehow not racist, but countryist, because that still seems like a weird thing.
Is that even a thing? I mean, there was a person in the crowd with a hockey stick. You notice that? There was a pitchfork and a hockey stick, and I was just like, this is Canadian.
Why didn't they use that to pull the kid out of the... Anyway.
You know, I think it's just someone that made this saw the Aristocats and was like, you know what, those geese were really funny. Let's just get one of them in. Who cares?
Well... And it is another case, too, I think, of them pulling in iconography and maybe not going as deep with it, or it's too deep for me to follow it, because, of course, goose was the traditional Christmas feast item. And then you have the wise men, and you have these, so you have this sort of this secular tradition of goose, which I'm sure has some sort of roots in religion, but is mostly at this point a secular concept. And then you have the religious iconography of the wise men, and it's all coming in here. And I will say this movie did to me feel like a Christmas movie. Part of it is because everyone's dressed for the part. Even the wise men, the aliens, have, you know, coats and hats. I think they're hats, maybe they're their head, I have no idea. And let's also mention, Greg, I think you said, they're really weird looking. Like, when they look like people from a distance, but then when they show the close-ups, I'm like, oh, that's like a spider face in like an old man's robe. Like, it's just, it was sort of out there. And also, can we talk about the opening where it's like, it's from inside their spaceship? You don't see them, you just see like stars spinning, and like it looks like an old Wing Commander game. And they're like, you know, like, to Earth. And it's just, it set the tone, because I'll be honest, I picked this movie by the title alone, and then when I dug into it, I was like, oh, this is right. This is perfect. And it is. And I really enjoyed this one. And I think it's a shame this is not in rotation, but I do wonder if I especially in our current situation and our current politics, if the fact that there is actual religious terms used in it, like Star of Bethlehem and Jesus, if that instantly takes it off of some rosters, and then the fact that it's a bunch of aliens teaching what Christmas is in a way is also takes it off for the other side, and that leaves a very narrow percent of channels that will ever broadcast this. And because I think the 90s were sort of a wild time. I know this isn't the 90s. I keep thinking this is the 90s because this to me feels like a very 90s production, although the visuals are very 70s. And I was not quite alive in the 70s to the extent that I could do
feels
anything.
kind of grungy at sometimes.
Sure, it does. And like I said, it feels like Heavy Traffic in the visuals. And Heavy Traffic is full of prostitutes and transvestites in the 70s turning tricks, and and I use that term because it's the term they used in the film, and it's just and racism and Vietnam vets who've lost their limbs and physical abuse. It's just crazy, and that feels like it would feel in place in this movie. It just almost seems like we just didn't see that stuff. Not that it wouldn't happen. There's also the terrifying scene where Marvin, the bad kid, he's talking about the goose, and he's like, I want a goose dinner, and he pulls out a switchblade, but then he flicks it and it's a comb.
It's a comb. I had one of those.
I did too. And it just seems like weird. It's menacing. Even though it's a comb, I'm like, oh, this is how they got it in there, but it didn't feel like a joke to me.
No, because this is because of Heavy Traffic, I half expected this movie to really take a dark turn, and throughout the entire thing, I was like, I could show my 8-year-old this movie and it'd be fine.
Yeah.
Weird.
And that's definitely, the case. And I like the ending. It's nice. And it's still got the grunginess. Like, the other thing is that the female character from the Ruffian Kids, when they're all in the house together, and she sits down next to the cop, and she goes, hey, big boy, let me see your badge. And he hands her his wallet, and she takes the badge and she tosses it to Marvin, who gives it to Peter to put on top of the tree. But just the fact that this who is clearly a child is acting this way to the officer. Where's this gonna go? It's even more than that. It's like, I'm like, oh, she's really a kid of the streets. Like, it just felt like there is an entire backstory here that is a very ugly, uncomfortable one. Yeah. And it's too real to dive into, and this moment is too sweet to be spoiled. But it just seems like I'm not exactly sure. It felt like Clive Smith made the movie, and the writers, there are 4 writers working on this. Feels like they made the movie they wanted to make for their reality and what they saw as reality, rather than the audience. And that, to me, is often what makes great cinema, right? Because it's a true vision versus a group consensus. And in this way, I really enjoyed this one. Well, I think that brings us up to the end here, where we're going to do a roundtable discussion of who should watch A Cosmic Christmas. Mandy, let's start with you. Who would you recommend A Cosmic Christmas to?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of a pass. It is kind of like, I don't know, it was interesting, but like you described, the very narrow band of people that might enjoy this. It felt like secular, like Christmas, but there were also the religious overtones. The art was very nostalgic, for like that, very nostalgic I love that freaking ape hangers on that kid's bicycle.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
So great.
Yeah. Pedal chopper.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, it didn't leave like a big impression on me to like go on and tell like, hey, you gotta go see this. This is like, or like put this on your next Christmas party in 2023 when we're allowed to actually have people over again.
Right, that's sad. Okay, yeah. Greg, who would you recommend A Cosmic Christmas to, and why?
I think I'm with Mandy. I don't know if I would really recommend it to anyone. I mean, if you want something kind of wild and short, if you wish Don Bluth did a Christmas short, I mean, this is dark and weird. I just remembered the scene near the end of the bully and the kid drowning. First the bully, then the kid trying to save him. That was terrifying. I was like, I think this kid's gonna die.
They look
this
like
Christmas
they're going
special.
to die. They did the glassy-eyed look. They're not staring at anything. One goes under when the other comes up.
Yeah, they look terrified. And like, and one of them, they're doing the thing that they always warn you about is don't be near people who are drowning because they try and pull you. But as kind of alternates, as I usually try and do, I'd say Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. It's equally strange in this kind of a reverent way where it's like vaguely theological. Or Christmas Carol, the movie. I don't know why they needed to call it that, but it's like a 2001 British Christmas Carol adaptation that's animated. Has my shining light Nicolas Cage in it as Jacob Marley, I believe. So yeah, those are my two recs.
Marley and Marley. Ooh. Of course, I gotta say, one of the all-time best Christmas movies of all time when we watch it is A Muppet Christmas Carol. A Muppet Christmas Carol. It is, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you believe in, I don't care what language you speak, I don't care if you're a space alien or the devil, you will enjoy A Muppet Christmas Carol. Tad, who will you recommend A Christmas Carol to? I mean, excuse me, you throw me off. Who are you going to recommend A Cosmic Christmas to?
Everyone should watch this movie, especially if you have kids. Sit down and watch this with your kids, which I'm going to. I'm going to have my child sit down and watch this with us, and he's just going to go, Dad, what is this movie? I'm going to enjoy that reaction because it's one you can totally sit down with your kids and have them watch this movie, and they'll just be like, what is this? Because it's totally safe. They will miss all the innuendo. They will miss all the weird stuff, and they'll just go, it's a Christmas movie. Daddy's weird.
True.
But they will bring to school the next day that Jesus Christ is a space alien, and then you'll get a very interesting call.
My wife's been watching Ancient Aliens anyway recently for fun, and this is just perfect because I mean the last episode was the founding fathers totally knew about space aliens. I'm like, okay, please explain.
Where do you think Washington got the technology for wooden teeth? So
that's actually not too far off. It was literally like, where did George Washington get the inspiration to stay at Valley Forge through the most hellish conditions ever? And it was apparently aliens.
Yeah, we've lived in New Hampshire. Like, that's pretty much par for the course. Yeah, I'm gonna, for my recommendation, I completely understand both Greg and Mandy's and your recommendation, Tad, because I do think this falls into a very narrow bandwidth of interest for people. I happen to be clearly dead center targeted by this film. I adored this film. I think Greg was right when he said people who like Don Bluth movies, and we're talking, of course, my brain's Rockadoodle, and Fern Gully. These movies where they're the kids' movies that many of us remember, but when you watch them as an adult, they take on a very different tone and sort of a vibe, and you're halfway between what the hell are they doing, and the other half is I can't believe they're doing that, that kind of thing. It's right in line with there, and also, of course, because I've mentioned Heavy Traffic 100 times, and Ralph Bakshi films are truly some of the greatest animated films to have ever come from the United States. I recommend it. If you have those interests, watch this, because it's an oddity that I think, because it's a short and not a feature, it's been lost more easily. And if you can find a copy of Nelvanimation, the compilation it was in from 1980, absolutely worth it. Give it a watch. And you can actually, I did check, you can find Cosmic Christmas currently. I believe it's actually a licensed stream of it on YouTube, although time will tell. Yeah, check out A Cosmic Christmas. If it's not your thing, it's only 20-something minutes of your life. And if it is, you're going to have something that you're going to think of every single Christmas year. All right. That is it for us here at Colton Classic Podcast. Playing us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. And as always, please, please, please follow us at Colton Classic Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, And join our Patreon at patreon.com/cultandclassicpodcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get awesome swag. We have autographed trading cards every month, physical trading cards, zines, bonus videos. You can watch videos of all of us. And thank you guys so much for listening. Like and subscribe. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.